We've had some really good discussion this week after a bad Easter weekend road toll. A really good discussion around road safety, our abilities as drivers, and the legislative framework that we drive under, particularly in regards to roadside drug testing. And we had a good conversation with Nick Smith about where we seem to have dropped the ball or run into some troubles implementing a roadside drug testing, this is not alcohol regime, that works, like they have in the UK and in Britain. I thought the best person, because you've been so interested in this, to get on to talk about that will be Simeon Brown. He is, of course, the MP for Pakuranga and the Minister of Transport. He joins us live now. Simeon, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning.
Good morning.
All right, where are we at with roadside drug testing? Because we haven't had anyone ring in who thinks it's a bad idea or we shouldn't get on with this.
Yeah, so the government is committed to introducing legislation this year and passing it as quickly as possible to fix the last government's legislation on this issue. Effectively, we are 100% supportive of it. The problem with the last piece of legislation was that the tests that were required had to be of an evidentiary standard rather than of a screening standard. And of course, with all of the tests that are used internationally, they screen for drugs. They have a very high degree of probability, but they're not of a quality to actually be of evidentiary standard to be.
But we had legislation, in other words, that was out of sync with the technology available.
Correct. So that was the legislation passed by the last government, and that now needs to be fixed. Legislation is currently being drafted to fix that. That'll align it with the Australian states effectively, so it'll require a test. If it's positive, then an evidentiary blood test will be required in order to confirm whether or not that person has drugs present. And ultimately, in the interim, that person won't be able to drive on the road. So that's where we're heading. We're committed to it. We want to see it on. We want to see the police being able to operate this as quickly as possible, and we'll be working at each step of the way to try and reduce any timeframes in terms of implementing it.
All right, and within the first term of this government, you'll have this done?
Absolutely. It's a top priority for us. We need to fix this legislation. It's about giving the police all the tools that they can and they need in order to improve road safety and enforce the law.
Yeah.
This is an additional tool in their toolbox, alongside breath testing, alongside, making sure people have got their seatbelts on, whatever it is, making sure that we are reducing the risky behaviours that are unfortunately behind so many of the deaths and serious injuries that we're seeing on our roads.
Yeah. We've had some really good discussion about driving after the Easter weekend, and one of the things that came up was that people say, we've got terrible roads, and people have made a comparison with Ireland, for example, same sort of population, pretty crappy roads, a lot of crappy roads in Ireland as well. At the end of the day, roads don't have motor vehicle accidents, do they?
Well, ultimately, yes, it is about the people who are driving and making sure that people aren't making risky decisions, that they are following the law, that they're driving to the conditions, and that's critically important. But ultimately, we also do need better roads. And that's why the government's draft government policy statement on transport, clearly articulates that the top priority for the investment from the National Land Transport Fund is building and maintaining our roads to a much better standard. That's why we're bringing back the roads of national significance, which is, yes, they boost economic growth and productivity, they reduce travel times, but they also improve safety. And if you look at the Waikato Expressway, which I don't think anyone in the country says we shouldn't have built it, that is the fastest road in the country, but it's also the safest.
Yeah, that's actually
that's the type of high-quality infrastructure we need as a country.
Yeah. Speed doesn't kill if you have a good road. Simeon, my other question to you on this, the one counterfactual that came back at me on the roadside drug testing was, there should be a test for impairment rather than for a level of a drug, that would be a better way to do it, and I guess it would be excused from saying.
Police have tools around that as well. But the key thing here is actually about deterring people from taking drugs and driving. We don't want we don't want drug drivers on our roads. We know that drugs and alcohol are the biggest killer on our roads, and that is unacceptable, and this government will have a zero tolerance approach towards enforcing those laws.
Yeah.
And that's why screening is part of a deterrent effect for the police being able to have a deterrent effect towards people undertaking those highly risky behaviours, which unfortunately lead to so many of the deaths and serious injuries on our roads.
Right. Look, while we have got you here, quite a lot of excitement or debate, controversy, God, I hate that word, about this local government New Zealand announcement you made yesterday, and that is that if local bodies are going to have Māori wards or specific Māori wards, they need to be, if you like, endorsed by a referendum of ratepayers. How many, have you done any figures on how many wards or councils or local bodies have Māori wards that haven't been endorsed by a referendum?
Yes, so we've obviously, what we're doing here is we're reinstating the previous legislation, which effectively says councils can have a Māori ward, but if they want to, the public have the right to petition and then have a referendum. And for those councils which set up those wards without a referendum, we're going to require one to allow the public to have a say.
What proportion of Māori wards?
There's about 45 councils have put in place Māori wards without a referendum. There are currently, I think, 4 councils which have Māori wards where there has been a referendum. So we're not going to require those councils to have another referendum because the public have already had their say and they said yes to having a Māori ward, and we respect that. That is the right of those communities. And I expect of the 45 councils which we're now going to require to have a Māori ward, some will say yes and some will say no. And that's the beauty of democracy and actually letting local ratepayers and voters have their say on what is quite a significant constitutional arrangement at the local level.
Yeah.